Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The government stands accused of repeatedly misleading Parliament with incorrect assurances that Saudi Arabia was not abusing human rights in Yemen. The Foreign Office suddenly retracted a series of statements on the crisis in Yemen, describing them as an error, adding that no such assessment of human rights had ever been carried out. With talks between Yemen's warring factions still deadlocked, our chief correspondent Alex Thompson has the latest.
From the UN onwards, Saudi Arabia is accused of breaking international humanitarian law in its war against Iranian-backed forces in Yemen. But here's the thing. In their fight, they're using £2.8 billion worth of British aircraft and munitions. Then, late yesterday, the government admitted misleading Parliament on 6 different occasions, telling MPs they'd assessed Saudi conduct when they hadn't, telling Parliament the Saudis weren't breaking international humanitarian law when they didn't know, and they still don't.
Quite astoundingly, the UK government, which has recently sold just under £3 billion worth of weapons to the Saudis, is not assessing whether these weapons are being used in breach of international humanitarian law. And of course, if the UK government were to assess and were to find that they were, we couldn't sell them. So I would say to our government, you need to get this assessed, independently assessed, and in the meantime, you need to stop selling weapons to the Saudis.
It's a classic piece of Mandarin speak designed to cover up misleading Parliament. The previous line was,
"We have assessed that there has not been a breach of international humanitarian law by the coalition."
But now the line is,
"We have not assessed that there has not been a breach of international humanitarian law by the coalition."
in plain English, they're simply saying that on no fewer than 6 occasions they misled Parliament, telling MPs that the Saudis were definitely not breaching international humanitarian law in the war in Yemen, when in fact they didn't know whether they were or whether they weren't. Not only that, this news was released in the very final hours of the last day of the parliamentary term. Tonight the Foreign Office said this does not represent a change in policy. We asked them if Boris Johnson or any minister had been consulted over the strange timing of this news. The Foreign Office declined to answer. Labour's Hilary Benn MP has today written to the then Foreign Secretary, now Chancellor, Philip Hammond.
I urge Boris Johnson as the new Foreign Secretary to ensure that the government does what you originally said it was doing and immediately assess whether international humanitarian law has been breached. A continued failure to undertake such an assessment would be an abdication of responsibility and will serve to further undermine Britain's standing in the world.
They're actually jaw-dropping revelations because they're not just minor clarifications, they're actually complete U-turns on previous answers that are given. It's not just about the correction of 6 parliamentary answers, it's about people's lives in Yemen, it's about the thousands of civilians who have lost their lives in this conflict.
Now, Britain has got military advisors and probably special forces on the ground in Yemen, eyes on when it comes to possible Saudi abuses of the hard-pressed civilian population. These images are from Save the Children. The UN this year reported at least 2,000 civilian deaths in the Saudi-led bombardment.
I wish that the war would stop because the children got injured. Some of them died and some of my friends had to flee and some died. We got separated because of the war.
I wish that the war would end, that we get electricity back and that water becomes available, everything becomes available, that we are safe.
In a relatively safe area supported by Save the Children, they can at least play for now. Back in the UK though, questions about our weapons in Yemen will redouble after the government tried to bury some very bad news and got found out.